Well, lots to cover today with our panel of party commentators. Susan Smith is a Liberal commentator, Kate Harrison is a Conservative commentator, and Robin MacLachlan is an NDP commentator. Let's start there. The comments we heard from the Vice President on the fact that the Prime Minister raised his concerns about growing restrictions on abortion in some U.S. states, and Mike Pence saying, look, friends can agree to disagree. He's if I can frame it this way, proud to be part of an administration that's pro-life. He's an anti-abortionist, has been all his life. But Susan, let me start with you. The Prime Minister wanted to raise this. He telegraphed yesterday that he was going to raise it. But who's the audience he's raising it for? Is it really Mike Pence, or is that for a Canadian
No,
audience?
I think that's for a domestic audience that's continuing to put the marker down that where the Prime Minister stands on that issue. I thought that was a decent part of the news conference today. Vice President Pence basically said friends can have differences of opinions. John Manley said that in the past, you can disagree without being disagreeable. So the Prime Minister put his marker down. Vice President Pence put his marker down. I think it's an issue we're going to continue to see in the campaign because Mr. Bernier's put a marker down, Mr. Scheer's put a marker down there, Mr. Singh has put a marker down. But the discussion will continue. It will seep over the border on an ongoing basis, I think, and the Prime Minister's staying clear.
What do you think, Kate?
I thought it was refreshing to see the two who are obviously pretty much opposite viewpoints on this issue kind of do so in a nice collaborative way. I think politicians in Canada could probably take a few lessons from the way that both Pence and Trudeau behaved, at least in that part of the press conference. Absolutely, this is for a domestic audience. I mean, it's a pretty transparent attempt to have this kind of very charged partisan issue take center stage with the Vice President.
Is there any threat to the relationship with the United States? Doesn't seem to be from what we saw today, but as the reporter asking the question put it to you, were you offended by being sermoned by the Prime Minister? In other words, lectured about rights in your country versus rights in our country?
Yeah, I do think that there is an element of playing with fire there, and we've seen it happen in the past too. Prime Minister Trudeau was making a speech at a university in New York and talked about the dangers of populism. That made its way back to Trump, and that was sort of like not a great period in the relationship. So I do think that there is a little bit of risk there. So that's something that we're going to have to watch and see. But I think it was an attempt to shoehorn this charged issue into an otherwise, monumental meeting, being the first that they've ever had.
Yeah, and I guess the timing on these kinds of things might be important, Robin. I mean, if there's ever a time you want to raise a domestic issue that might be somewhat thorny, you raise it when the other side really needs your cooperation in getting a trade deal. They want you to show you're ratifying in Canada so they can go back to the U.S. Congress and say, look, Canada's pushing ahead with it, let's get a deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reporter, to be frank, probably did the Liberals a favor by suggesting that Justin Trudeau had been sermoning Mr. Pence and the Vice President. I doubt that it was that way in the room, because I think the priority really, let's be frank, was USMCA on both sides of the border, from the executive branches at least. And to be frank, I think that the domestic audience is obviously what they're playing to on both issues of this. I mean, this is a good day for the Prime Minister. If he gets to stand and look prime ministerial, doing things on the world stage, not facing attacks for various scandals or issues he's got, but talking about trying to get things done. The problem is, of course, for both Mr. Pence and Mr. Trudeau, they're not the ones in control of getting this done right now. Canada's doing what it can on the ratification side, but has to wait and see what happens south of the border of the U.S. On the abortion issue, obviously it is timely. It's very much geared towards the election and domestic audience. And it's always a little bit frustrating to watch how Liberals very much like to have these values fights when we get into an election that I don't think necessarily further the issue. A reporter might have asked, Mr. Trudeau, what have you done in your administration to actually improve access to reproductive health rights? There was a Liberal government in PEI for a very long time that was not providing access to abortion for their citizens of PEI. What did the government of Trudeau do to improve access to care? Because in PEI, they don't have that.
Okay, the other thing I thought was, and Susan, let me turn to you on this, and I think Liberals are probably across the country, but certainly in this city, we're probably, given what we see in the daily question period, and we saw it again today, Conservatives hammering the government. The Prime Minister wasn't in the House today, but hammering the Prime Minister, saying, his negotiating, that basically gave away the farm on this trade deal, was a humiliation of historic proportions. And here's Mike Pence shows up in Ottawa and says, 2 or 3 times at least, boy, the Prime Minister drives a hard bargain. What did you think when you heard that?
Well, I think that that's what happened, is the Prime Minister drove a hard bargain. And to just final or close on the sermonizing, whether or not Mr. Trudeau did that, the Vice President was very clear that they had a cordial discussion. And I think that was the tone of the discussion all throughout the day. There was no sermonizing happening from anybody on either side. With regards to negotiating a tough deal, I mean, the evidence of that is that the steel tariffs came off, that the deal got done, and it doesn't give the opposition many legs to stand on when the people who were on the other side of the negotiating table said Canada drove a tough bargain. And the Prime Minister's message was, we were able to drive a tough bargain was because we were united on the issue. And whether you had Rona Ambrose and James Moore, former Conservatives, you had union members, all part of the advisory group that was working with the Prime Minister and the government to negotiate the new NAFTA. That's the outcome we got. That's how, as a country, we were able to drive a tough deal. And I don't think the opposition has much to stand on.
Yeah, the Conservatives certainly want to make this an election issue, and probably still will. Although, how does this change that conversation, that narrative of, boy, you took on the United States over a new trade deal. You offered to renegotiate the trade deal, and you got taken. When the Vice President says, boy, the guy drives a hard bargain.
Well, I think there's still a lot of, nits to pick when it comes to how USMCA came about. There's still a lot of open questions as well in terms of how this goes about being implemented. Sure, the deal in principle is what it is, but there's a lot of specifics that I think remain a little bit unclear, particularly for those in the technology sector, for instance. I know there's still a lot of questions about IP and how Canada is going to control some of what is generated here. So there are a lot of open questions there, and I think when you look more broadly at how free trade has progressed or not progressed in Canada outside of this one deal, which we didn't choose to renegotiate, right? What else have we done to move the markers forward on free trade? TPP, we're not really anywhere further than we were before, so I think Conservatives will be pointing to that lack of record.
Hey, hang on, Robin, what do you think?
Yeah, so look, I think progressives in Canada, and Liberals need progressives to vote for them to get re-elected, will probably look to Democrats in the United States on judging how progressive the deal is rather than Mike Pence. So if Mike Pence says that Justin Trudeau fought for a hard progressive deal, if I'm a progressive in Canada, I might think what Nancy Pelosi or others in the U.S.
Yeah,
might
but
say.
earlier in the program, we had Hassan Yousaf here, the head of the CLC, saying this is as good a deal as we could get. He wants the Democrats to push for reopening it down there if they can get new measures put in it. But I asked him specifically, is the NDP wrong to oppose this deal? And he said, this is a good deal.
One thing that Hassan Yousaf's working hard on is a national pharmacare program. Right. And what's going to be a lot harder because of this deal is keeping pharmaceutical prices down. We now have American IP rules in terms of patents for pharmaceutical companies, thanks to USMCA. So what's that going to do? It's not going to be tomorrow or the day after, but your drug prices are going to go up because of USMCA. I'm not saying we don't want this deal.
I'm just saying we have this. We have the head of the largest labor organization in the country saying this is a good deal for workers, and New Democrats saying no, it's not.
I know. Look, it's a tough situation. You need it. We need a deal. We need to have trade with the United States. There's no doubt about that. But don't tell me that this is the most progressive deal we could have gotten.
I think we have to go back and remember that President Trump said he was going to tear up NAFTA, and there would have been no deal, or the old U.S. Free Trade Agreement, and it would have been a disaster for us from an economic perspective. That's why labor is on board and we're part of the discussion. That's why business was on board, agriculture was on board and part of the discussion. So I think, the coalition of Canadians or Canadian interests that supported the new USMCA, it's not perfect. No deal is ever perfect. That's what a negotiation is about. And same with CPTPP, the deal that has been ratified, CETA, the deal that got passed, and the interprovincial trade deals that are barriers that are coming down across the country. The Prime Minister will be able to say, come election time, that there has been good progress on trade.
Let's move on. What did you think, Kate, when you saw the stories this week? The backroom Liberals talking about, hey, if we get torched in the fall election, let's bring back Mark Carney. Let's get Mark Carney back from the Bank of England where he is till next year, and let's have him become Liberal leader. Odd timing to hear that conversation? Or?
Odd timing. I mean, I have to say, as a longtime Ontario PC supporter, it really warmed my heart to know that it was not just my party that continues to do this over and over again, question their current leader. So that was nice. No, I can't imagine this. It's never helpful when these stories come up. I think there's reason to question, why they're coming up now and how insider this information actually is. You can talk about Carney's credibility as a candidate or not, and I think that that's a discussion that should probably happen after October. But it doesn't really speak favorably to the morale of the Liberal Party when this kind of thing comes to light.
I mean, Robin, the fact that that we're 5 months away from an election and some Liberals seem to we got to be thinking succession now. I mean, does that seem strange to you?
No, it takes me back to the days of Stéphane Dion's leadership. I mean, Liberals are going to be Liberals, and Liberals are always looking for the next savior of the Liberal Party, even when they're in power, apparently. But look, if they do crash and burn in this election, and I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, I think they've got some time still to turn this around. Bringing Mark Carney back from navigating the Bank of England through Brexit might be somebody who would be able to navigate the Liberal Party through what would be a pretty abysmal failure to go from having the most political capital from anybody I can remember as a leader, in my lifetime at least, to losing after one mandate. That would be quite a devastating outcome.
Susan, why is this happening?
Well, I think the party's been through some rough waters of the last few months. There's no doubt about that. But who's saying what sources? There's always rumblings along the way. That's not new in politics. It's not new for any party. I think there's a long way to go between now and the election. I think Justin Trudeau still has a lot of good political capital. And we have a few months to go from a governing side and up to a 50-day campaign to watch. So I think it's all premature.
Almost out of time, but let me stay with you to start this quickly. Andrew Scheer unveiled his immigration policy this week. Not a whole lot of details, not a whole lot of, but really designed, I think, to try to restore an image that we're friendly to immigration when they're being hammered a lot, that they're attacking immigration. Did it work?
No, I don't think so. I don't know how many people were paying attention at the moment. He's got a few sound bites that he can use, but he's still the guy that went to the rally with Faith Goldie and did interviews with her. He's still the guy that was there when the yellow vest protesters were on the Hill. He's still the guy that campaigned for a barbaric cultural practices tip line. He was on that, he was part of that campaign last time around, didn't denounce it. I think he's trying to say we're not racist. That's a good thing. I think that's an important thing to say, but you have to walk the talk.
Kate?
Yeah, I think he did exactly what he needed to do, which was be unequivocal in the fact that there's no place for extremism or bigotry or racism in Canada. And if you subscribe to those ideologies or their beliefs, this is not the party for you. So I think that was the main message that came out of his speech.
But how do you travel that? How do you travel that personal commitment and that stand that you take into something you can actually put in front of people to say, see, this proves that I'm a man of my word.
Yeah, don't disagree. You actually need to back it up with action, right? So when there are candidates that say things that are, not in line with that, you need to be definitive. So I think that, the position has been made. You can refer back to it whenever those claims come up, but you also need to back it up with action. I think he's prepared to do it.
That's hitting the nail on the head, what Kate just said. So look, he said what he needed to say, and he should say that, and it was important to say that because, to be frank, the Conservative Party, and more broadly the Conservative movement in Canada, has a racism problem. That doesn't mean that Conservatives are racist, but he has to stomp that out, and it's incumbent upon him as the leader of the party that's having challenges with this. We've seen it with the UCP, United Conservative Party in Alberta during their election and some of their candidates. He needed to say this, he now needs to do this, and that means when we're going to have those flare-ups, when we're going to see a candidate where somebody's going to say something that's just wrong and extremist, he has to be unequivocal and immediate. And you know what? He hasn't done that. And the example for that is Senator Lindbayek. She is the one that says residential schools did great things. The stories of them doing bad things and harmful things are overblown. And he did not manage that situation at all well. So when the next Lindbayek erupts, bozo eruption, he's got to stomp that out and use the actions as Kate suggested.
Yeah, one thing I just really want to add quickly is another point he made in the speech was we need to be able to have a reasonable, fact-based debate on immigration in Canada without calling each other names. And I think that that's a sentiment that Conservatives and others frankly have. So that to me was a really important point for him to make.
Point made. Thank you.
Thank you.